And in this show, we are going to focus on a very special group of people that form the majority of our country, and that's the growing middle class of India. Well, India's middle class is set to double by the year 2047, according to a new report by the People Research on India's Consumer Economy or Price. The report, which was released by the former CEO of NITI Aayog, Mr. Amitabh Kant, says that the share of India's middle class in the total population of the country is set to grow from about 31% in the year 2021 to over 60% in the year 2047. The report also says that the number of people in the middle class, or the number of people with an annual income of 5 to 30 lakh rupees, will actually more than double from over 400 million in 2021, as you can see, to over 1 billion in the year 2047. On the other side, the number of rich people, these are people with an annual income of over 30 lakh rupees, this group will grow around 8 times from 56 million in 2021 to around 437 million in the year 2047. So while these two classes are clearly growing, the number of comparatively poor people, or aspirers and destitutes as the report calls them, will actually fall. The number of people with an annual income of around 1.25 lakh rupees to 5 lakh rupees will actually fall from 732 million in the year 2021 to 184 million in the year 2047. People with an annual income of less than 1.25 lakh rupees, which is a monthly income of around 10,000 rupees, that group will fall from around 196 million in the year 2021 to just around 25 million in 2047. So it's clear that people falling in these last two income brackets are likely to upgrade to higher income classes. But there's an important disclaimer here. 5 lakh rupees today won't have the same worth, same value in 2047, as there'll be inflation as well. So the amount of goods you can buy for 5 lakh rupees today, you won't be able to buy the same amount of goods in 2047 because prices will increase every year. So an upgradation simply in terms of income, in terms of nominal income, might not always mean an upgradation in the standard of living for these people. So that's important to note. Now, additionally, the report also says that if political and economic reforms have their desired effect, that's when we can expect these changes. So that's what this report is assuming, that political and economic reforms will have their effect and India will maintain a growth rate of around 6 to 7%. And why is this growing middle class really significant? Well, India's middle class is the country's biggest contributor in terms of income, spending and savings. It makes up about 30% of the country's population, but the middle class generates about half of the country's income, expenditure and savings, as you can see. This is the contribution of India's middle class in income, expenditure and savings, while the contribution in population is just about 31%. On the lower end, if we look at the aspirers and destitutes, if you look at this graph, the country's population, the aspirers make about 52% or half of the country's population, but their contribution to India's income is just a quarter, while destitutes make up about 13% of the country's population, but their contribution to the national income is just around 2%. Let's also see how these distributions have changed over the past few years. The number of quote-unquote super rich or households with an annual income of more than 2 crore rupees actually doubled from 1995 to 2021, according to this report. The share of destitutes which fall in the least income bracket, according to this report, is expected to fall to about 2% in 2047, as you can see in this figure, while the middle class is likely to grow to over 60%, while in the year 2005 it was just around 30%. Let's now also look at the state-wise distribution. Well, Maharashtra is the richest state with the highest number of quote-unquote super rich households. This Maharashtra then is followed by Delhi, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu and Punjab, who have more than 1 lakh super rich households. In fact, half of the country's super rich households live in just 2 states, Maharashtra and Delhi, the national capital, as you would expect. So this is what the report says, and it says that it clearly shows that India's middle class is clearly growing at a very fast rate. So let's understand what are the significance of this, what are the implications of this. To understand that, we have experts joining us on the broadcast. We have Mr. Gurcharan Das, who's an author and commentator. We also have Professor Santosh Mehrotra, who's a senior economist. And we also have Manu Gaur, who's a population expert. Thanks very much, gentlemen, for joining us on the broadcast. Well, my first question to you, Mr. Das. We are seeing, according to this report, that India's middle class will double in just about less than 25 years from now. So what is the social, political and economic significance of this? The middle class will definitely add to the workforce. Along with that, the customer base for MNCs as well. So what's the significance that you're looking at, both socially, politically, economically as well?
Well, first of all, I think this will work. This is possible, but only if we can create an industrial revolution and in these next 25 years, which is to say that we've grown at 7% a year for the last 30 years, and that's damn good for a democracy. But we haven't created enough jobs, and we haven't created enough jobs because we still have not created an industrial revolution, meaning manufacturing is still very small. It should be double the size than it is today. But I'm hopeful that actually the conditions today are such that it will be possible to create that industrial revolution and that we would be able to continue at a high growth rate. The reason for that is the infrastructure today is far better than it ever was. The road mileage has doubled since 2011. The port handling capacity has quadrupled. We have, with GST, we have one India, one indirect sales tax, one tax. And plus there are other factors. For example, the bank accounts. It was less than 50%. Now the bank accounts are close to 88%. So, I mean, I could go on, but my point is that all these conditions have made it possible. And particularly now with the disillusionment with China, I think India should get its fair share of manufacturing. But we can't just skip from a green revolution and move to a digital revolution. We have to go through the manufacturing stage. And that's the only way. I mean, these numbers can come true, but only if that happens.
Right. So that's very interesting, Mr. Das, that these conditions are necessary for these numbers to come true and for India to reap the benefits, really. And Mr. Mehrotra, if I can come to you next, another disclaimer sort of that we should add here is that even though, let's say, incomes increase from just about 1.25 lakh rupees per annum, as this report classifies as the destitute category, even if their incomes increase to around 4 to 5 lakhs per annum, we're talking about the year 2047. So by that year, the value that 5 lakh rupees holds today will not be the same. So we might change the definitions of middle class by 2047, won't we?
Yeah, indeed, we will, of course. But I'm sure the authors have taken that fact into account. That's why they're talking about the shares of the population today and 24, 5 years from now. So that's okay. I don't think that's my issue with all these projections, because let's just remember these are projections. So I have two fundamental questions about this report, because I've just seen the 5-6 pager, which seems to be like a less than a newspaper article, and it doesn't answer the foundational conceptual questions. How are these categories are decided upon as to what these thresholds are, and why are these thresholds where they are? Why is the aspirer between, less than 5 lakhs and so on and so forth? The more important point, honestly, Pramshi, is the following. This is a survey which attempts to estimate household income. Now, we are a highly informalized economy. some 90% of our enterprises are in the unorganized sector. Some 70% of them are unregistered anywhere. And the vast majority of our workers have incomes from multiple sources. In a developing country with a highly informalized economy, usually income surveys are not conducted because incomes are rarely, if ever, correctly reported, which is the reason why across the globe, when poverty estimates are done, or you do class categorizations, it is done by consumption expenditure. Now, the trouble is we don't have a consumption expenditure survey for the last 10 years. Be that as it may, let's come back to the price survey, and the difficulty remains, how do you estimate income? How have they done it? We have no notion. We have no idea because this is not explained in the 2 or 3 pager that has been made public. I mean, I don't know where the report is. And let me turn to another conceptual issue. What is the growth rate of income or GDP that has been assumed between now and the next 25 years? So there are multiple issues around these numbers. Morgan Stanley similarly came up with similar sort of projections about how the middle class is about. Arey Baba, the middle class is always growing. The real issue is the share of the so-called quote-unquote middle class growing in the total population or not? Now, the facts that we do know are that wealth inequalities are increasing and income inequalities are increasing, and the organized sector is doing very well and the unorganized sector is doing very poorly because jobs are not growing. And Mr. Gurucharan Das mentioned that. And I think I agree with him as far as the need for an industrial transformation in our economy. Otherwise, the jobs are not going to happen. But those are policy issues. Let's not go there. My real concern is, what about these simple questions? For newspapers or for TV shows, you can do this categorization and say 25 years from now, this middle class will be X. And the Morgan Stanley report about 5-6 months ago did or 2 months ago, they did something similar. With no basis for no explanation for how they were arriving at these numbers. No basis. So who am I to believe? Why am I supposed to believe this? Suppose I come up with similar numbers, Priyanshi, tomorrow and publish it. Are you going to do a story about what I do?
So the report says that they have, a sample size of around 50,000 households. I'm just telling you what the report says, and definitely not vouching for the credibility of this, but it's a report and it's an interesting, it is definitely an interesting development for our country because, of course, if the middle class grows, which you've said it is growing, but if it grows so exponentially, it is going to have certain very important economic implications, and that's all we're discussing. So we are just, for now, taking the report on its word and talking about what happens if this comes true. So definitely those are some conditions for this to come true. So that
wonderful things will happen if this comes true. I wish all of us good luck.
Yeah, well, so we have pointed out that these will be the conditions that will be needed for the country to make this figure come true in 2047. So we'll wait to see whether that happens. But Mr. Manu Gaur, एक जो सवाल बहुत बार उठता है मिडिल क्लास के बारे में, और अभी भी यहाँ पर उठा जो प्रोफेसर मेहरोत्रा ने कहा कि ये रिपोर्ट्स जो अलग-अलग रिपोर्ट्स अलग-अलग मिडिल क्लास की डेफिनेशंस बताती हैं, कुछ 5 से 30 लाख का इनकम ब्रैकेट इस रिपोर्ट ने लिया है, कुछ अलग रिपोर्ट्स अलग इनकम ब्रैकेट लेती हैं, तो क्या मिडिल क्लास का एक क्लियर डेफिनेशन है और क्या आप उसके ट्रेंड्स देख रहे हैं? अगर वो हम कोई क्लियर डेफिनेशन, एक यूनिफॉर्म डेफिनेशन फॉलो करें तो?
प्रियांशी, इंडिया में फर्स्ट बीपीएल सर्वे, बिलो पॉवर्टी लाइन सर्वे हुआ 1961 में। हमारी 16 बिलियन पॉपुलेशन 16 करोड़ पॉपुलेशन हमारी बिलो पॉवर्टी लाइन थी। 2011 के सेंसस में वो बढ़कर 36 करोड़ हो गई। 2011 के बाद आप देखेंगे तो जो बीपीएल सर्वेज होते हैं, बिलो पॉवर्टी लाइन सर्वेज, वो अलग अलग डिफरेंट पैरामीटर्स पे होते हैं। किसी के पास अपना घर है या नहीं है, घर में इलेक्ट्रिसिटी है नहीं है, वाटर कनेक्शन है नहीं है, आज की डेट में टेलीविजन है, इंटरनेट कनेक्शन है, तो ये सारे के सारे पैरामीटर्स होते हैं। 2011 के बाद से जो ये गवर्नमेंट ने वेलफेयर स्कीम्स चलाई, उन वेलफेयर स्कीम्स के रीजन से वो पैरामीटर्स चेंज हुए हैं, लोगों के घरों में घर पहुंच गए हैं, बिजली के कनेक्शन पहुंच गए हैं। तो दूसरा उनका मेजर एक्सपेंडिचर होता था फॉर फूड, अपने घर के खाने के लिए। दूसरा हेल्थ इश्यूज पे, तो जो ये आयुष्मान भारत और ये एजुकेशन न्यू एजुकेशन पॉलिसी लेके आए, जैसे हमारा एजुकेशन का ग्राफ बढ़ा है, सबसे इम्पोर्टेंट चीज ये है कि हेल्थ और हाउस होल्ड एक्सपेंडिचर जो था वो हमारे कम हुए हैं, जो गवर्नमेंट ने वेलफेयर स्कीम्स दी हैं। उसके अलावा एक चीज और देखने की है कि अभी इंडिया डेमोग्राफिक डिविडेंड के फेज में है। हमारी यंग पॉपुलेशन ज्यादा है, हमारी वर्किंग पॉपुलेशन ज्यादा है, और इस वर्किंग पॉपुलेशन के ज्यादा होने की वजह से हमारी इनकम वर्किंग हैंड्स बढ़े हैं, डिपेंडेंट पॉपुलेशन हमारी कम है आज की डेट में, और ये लगभग अभी अगले 30-32 साल तक और रहनी है। तो पॉपुलेशन ज्यादा होने की वजह से, यंग पॉपुलेशन, वर्किंग पॉपुलेशन ज्यादा होने की वजह से इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ होना स्वाभाविक चीज है। दूसरी एक सबसे महत्वपूर्ण चीज ये है कि हमारे जितने भी गवर्नमेंट की स्कीम्स हैं, हम इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ तो कर पाएंगे उनकी वजह से, लेकिन क्या उन्हें क्वालिटी लाइफ मिल पा रही है?
एग्जैक्टली, राइट।
क्वालिटी लाइफ के ये है रीजन कि क्या ओवर पॉपुलेशन होने की वजह से हमारी इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ तो हो रही है, लेकिन हमारा पॉल्यूशन बढ़ रहा है।
जी।
हमारा जो खाना खाते हैं हम लोग, जो उसमें फूड अडल्ट्रेशन हमारा बढ़ रहा है, केमिकल फर्टिलाइजर्स का प्रोडक्टिविटी बढ़ाने की वजह से रेट बढ़ रहा है हमारा।
जी मिस्टर मनोगौर, क्वालिटी ऑफ लाइफ, और दूसरा आपने ये भी मेंशन किया कि इनइक्वालिटी जो हमारी एक बहुत बड़ी प्रॉब्लम है। मिस्टर दास, इफ आई कैन कम टू यू ऑन दैट, लेट्स जस्ट पुट आउट दैट Oxfam report that came out earlier this year in the month of January that said that India's richest 1% own 40% of the wealth. So even while we say that the people in the aspirers or destitute category, according to this report, their incomes might rise, but income inequality is still extremely stark in our country, isn't it, Mr. Gurcharan Das? So that's a major concern. Even if middle class grows, the people above them are only going to grow even further.
That is true. But think of it like this, that if everybody is going upwards, if you have growth, if you're creating jobs, and what is important is that your people below the poverty line are coming down to almost a marginal amount, your middle class is over 50%, then, I wouldn't worry too much. We shouldn't get hung up if some people are getting richer much faster. Obviously, that's not a good thing. I mean, the ideal society is not such an unequal society. The critical thing is now, not only did I say that we need to create an industrial revolution, that manufacturing has to rise much more, but also that if we can provide equality of opportunity, good schools for everybody. Today, what is sad about India's education structure is, frankly, that the quality of education that people get of a decent nature is confined to only about 20% of India. We need much better quality schooling, and we need to have a check. I mean, 1 out of 4 school teachers is absent, and it forces even the poor to go into private schools if the teachers don't come in government schools. Those, I believe, I mean, you can't be a middle class and not have a good education.
Absolutely.
So I would say that 1, create an industrial revolution. 2, and that's possible, as I said, why? And 2, really reform our schools. And the other thing is, today 50% of Indian children are in private schools. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, we should. India is rising despite the state.
Right.
I wrote a book called "India Grows at Night When the Government Sleeps."
Right.
Well, the reality is we can't have. India must grow during the day.
Right.
We must have the government.
Clearly,
So I would say if we can provide equality of opportunity, let's not worry about the other kind of inequality.
Right. So clearly, we all seem to agree that we shouldn't just stick to the numbers, but it's the quality of life that we need to focus on. So there needs to be focus on health, education to ensure that people's standard of living is actually improving and not just their income, because that will change according to the years. That will change according to growth, inflation as well. And as our guests have explained, that this has several conditions that will have to be met in order to for this to come true. But of course, as all projections are based on some assumptions, that's the case with this one as well. But these were the points. This is how a growing middle class for the country will have an impact on the country's social, political and economic sphere. But of course, quality of life is something that needs to be focused on a policy perspective, from a policy sphere, and not just sticking to these numbers. That's all we have for you in this discussion. News continues on the other side of this very short break. Thanks for watching.